This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 143.
This is their learning cave, and this is a place to make mistakes because, as a very famous literacy leader, Dr. Terry Noland, one of my favorite people on the planet, says, you have to fail forward. And saying that failure is not an option, or, like it's getting kids afraid to make mistakes. I think that kids are starting to be afraid of mistakes because of what they're exposed to and see.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Kennerman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the Reading Rainbow Rogers. Matt, how you doing, my man?
I don't know. That might be a revisited one.
Is it? As I said that, I kind of felt that.
I mean, I'm not going to take the time to go back and check, but getting to the real point, buddy, I am tired. I don't know about you. There is something different. So we're recording this. This is the first full week, or I guess the first full cycle has finally finished. I just finished day 6, and I understand why looping is so difficult. But besides that, life is good. How are you?
I feel in that I'm teacher tired and I'm parent tired. We're in the first week of school, which actually it's only been 2 days. I'd say it's a little bit lighter for me as a coach these 2 days versus last week. I was absolutely slammed where it's the teacher days and I'm helping everybody get set up for the year and leading professional learning and that kind of thing. But my oldest, my son, walked on the bus for the first time yesterday.
Did you cry?
Morning. I did not.
Did your wife cry?
I plead the fifth.
Poor
Yes.
Steph. It's
Yes.
okay. As expected.
Yep, but he was brave. He got on the bus by himself.
I'm sure he had no second thoughts.
He did really well. I was proud of him. It's, I never really thought about that moment, but for him, he had never seen a bus stop before.
Yep.
And he's going on by himself, right? There's no one there. Whereas like I'm looking at my other two, their first time on the bus, they'll be walking on with their big brother. And then, my youngest, she'll be walking on with her big brother and her big sister.
Yep.
So it'll be a little bit different for them, but it's neat having him in school and putting on the parent hat and experiencing some of these things that I've been on the other end for so long. So I am definitely coach tired and dad tired this week.
That's fair.
But we had an awesome guest on tonight, Leana Malinowsky, and she's a primary teacher and she is super passionate about literacy. And we really dive deep into two topics I would say we haven't touched on a whole lot: literacy and that what that instruction looks like, and co-teaching as well. Any big takeaways before we jump in?
Well, I think that when you need an expert in an area, probably the most important person to be really good at their job is a primary teacher with an emphasis of literacy. And I think the biggest indicator of success is going to be whether or not a student is a successful reader. And we all know this, and there is a tremendous amount of research coming out that kind of talks about predictors around that, the science of reading, and the best methods to lead towards fluency, whether you're learning English as a primary language or a secondary language. And you can just tell that she absolutely digs literacy and in general learning, up for any challenge, completely dedicated. And it's just one of those conversations that you would feel so comfortable if your child was in her class, because you knew they were going to be taking strides towards being a lifelong learner, and a functional reader at such an early age.
I totally agree. I think this episode in particular is really powerful for elementary teachers focused on teaching that literacy component, but meaningful overall for teachers that are looking to think about the science behind what we teach and how we teach and why we teach it, and tapping even back into Weston Kieschnick, which I think was show 124. If I take a stab out there, where we talk a lot about pedagogy, the best way to improve student outcomes and student learning and student scores is by knowing the good pedagogical strategies that are out there to best teach our students. And so this, I think, was a really good reminder for that. So I'd like to cut right to it. So let's hear from Teach Better and then bring in Leana Malinowsky.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcast. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Leana. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited to connect with you. We know that we were connected from former guest Christine Grattain, so we're excited to learn from you and hear about your story and your passions in education. So kick things off for us nice and simple. Officially introduce yourself. Let our audience know where you're coming from and give us a snapshot of your career in education.
All right. Well, thank you. I'd be happy to do that. So it's a pleasure to meet and unofficially meet all of the listeners out there. So my name is Leana. I have been a practicing educator since 2008, so quite some time now. I'm creeping into year 15, I believe. Can't believe that. I have taught mostly first grade throughout my career, although I have had a span of 5 years where I taught second grade. Primarily, I have worked with students in both the general education and special education settings for about 5 years, I should say. I had a co-teacher. We're not together this year, sad to say, but we're still considering ourselves co-teachers. So I served as the general education teacher in the inclusion class setting. I am also a certified reading specialist, and recently this summer, I completed a very rigorous exam and some coursework and some practicum hours, and I officially completed my structured literacy dyslexia interventionist certification. And I'm still continuing to grow because I believe teaching is lifelong learning, and I hope to become a specialist in dyslexia by the end of next year. So it's been quite a busy summer, to say the least. I absolutely love literacy. So that's my wheelhouse, along with working with my little ones, because I love the littles, but I teach big kids reading as well. And I can say very proud that last year I was named the 2022-2023 Middlesex County, New Jersey Teacher of the Year, because I come from North Jersey. And I am also the runner-up, top 4 finalist for State Teacher of the Year for last year as well. So it was our year of yes. It's been a very busy year, a very rewarding year. I like to say that when I'm not teaching the littles, I am teaching the big kids, because one of my other passions is working with the pre-service teachers right here in New Jersey, all throughout, but primarily my home university is Kane University. So I work with the pre-service teachers there and get them ready to get energized for their classroom experiences. So I have my hands in a lot of pots, but it's, a very great stew that we're brewing, because I want to share my passion for teaching with anyone and everyone that's willing to listen.
So over the course of your career, with your with your developing love for literacy and your extensive studies in literacy, what would you say has really crept forward as the 1 or 2 key components that you feel are really necessary for a primary literacy lesson, or overall classroom structure, even if it's not a component of every lesson, that you feel teachers need to think about and reflect on and evaluate whether or not it's a part of their daily instruction?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because everybody, including yourself, Ken, you probably have been hearing a lot of buzz talk about the science of reading going on. And that is a real thing. It's not a myth. It's not just the reading wars come back to haunt us type thing. I even said in my own individual podcast at one point, I don't know how we got to that place of reading wars anyway, but I don't even like it. So I would say that the key component for any educator, be it your pre-service and you haven't been in the classroom yet, or you're a veteran teacher like myself, is to make sure that whatever you're teaching is based on evidence-based practices, because we know that data talks, right? Obviously numbers talk and evidence talks, and we do have evidence to prove how our brains learn to read. There's so many great researchers out there. I could probably ramble off a laundry list of their names, but a simple Google search will take you there quickly. And you want to make sure that you're hitting all of the 5 pillars of literacy, not just in one lesson, but throughout your structure, your periods, your day. You want to talk about the phonological and phonemic awareness. You want to talk about vocabulary and fluency and comprehension. You want to make sure that your students are exposed to all of those pillars. It's not just phonics or just comprehension like we're led to believe, but us learning to read is based on our ability to decode, which is read words, and process language. So you want to hit all of those pillars for sure.
I think one of the things, and I'll make sure to save this question for a little bit later, but I have some questions about your thoughts about fluency and priorities of reading at certain age levels. So I will save that. That's a little preview, but I think when talking about phonemic and phonemic awareness, phonics, those base skills that are the foundation of language for these learners, I think oftentimes when I hear that as someone that doesn't teach phonics and phonemic awareness on the daily, I just remember the interview prep that I went through to say, oh, can I tell which one is different, to clearly identify that I know enough phonics to get hired. I remember that being something that my pre-service teacher really pushed at us. I guess where you see the progression of reading, because it really is a progression, where do you find um, major hiccups that you see as your coming back point? So you're always really hitting that. It is always a struggle. And I'll add to that, do you feel like sometimes those struggles are developmentally? Like, we'll use a perfect example. We have a friend of ours who doesn't think, he teaches STEM. There are certain things that the kids are not prepared for until they're third graders, right? That's just a developmental thing. Are some of those roadblocks that you see based off development, or just that spectrum of learning?
Yeah, sure. I think, like you said, we as people, we are not hardwired to learn how to read. That is not how our brains were built. We have to teach ourselves how to read. We were built with language as being what we're supposed to do. Babies learn to talk no matter what the language, and unless there are developmental delays or something else that families have to be concerned with, they pick up on the language and they start to learn to talk before we learn that those squiggles on the page mean something. So I think the first roadblock that children encounter is very young, because they're walking around at home, they're talking, they hear their families talking. Our beautiful ELL and EL students are, dual language. They can speak 2 languages. I'm lucky I can only speak one, I'm lucky I do that proficiently. So, and it's easy. And then they come to school and it's like, oh, these squiggles mean something. We have to teach that there is what we call that phoneme, the sound to grapheme letter. That squiggle is a grapheme. It means something. And they tend to get stuck there. The other time that they get stuck is when they have to sort of switch between, okay, we taught them that these sounds, the the ah, the t, make the word mat, but now we have to write it. So now we have to produce these squiggles, right? So there's another, sort of hiccup in their development of reading. And then when you touched upon fluency before, I'm glad you mentioned that, because fluency tends to be And a lot of literacy gurus say this, it's the bridge, right, between that phonics area and then those higher order thinking skills for reading, developing vocabulary, understanding advanced words, and comprehension. So I think that fluency takes the longest, especially I've noticed teaching both first and second grade. In second grade, come April, I took for granted what I did so hard and so long in first grade, because you're teaching them just basic words. It's like climbing stairs. Here's a word, here's a word, here's a word. And then by second grade, we expect them to have that fluency. So I would say that those are the three biggest. But of course, like anything else that you're learning, there are going to be roadblocks along the way. Some children, when they are diagnosed with dyslexia, there's different types of things that they could struggle with. Most often it is the phonics part, but comprehension is there too. So a roadblock can be pretty much anything, but I think that fluency one, if I had to picture it like a timeline going across, is that big red area. And once you get past fluency, you're hopefully a little bit better and farther along.
Hey, I have to jump in real quick. I was at a training recently, and they mentioned that there's a specific font that was created to help learners with dyslexia, and it's called Lexend, Lexend. And the way that it's structured are the letters are created in a digital platform that are the least challenging to learners with dyslexia. And so just a little thing that I found out recently that I've translated, it's one of those, what's good for one kid might be great for all kids. And it's now become my default font because this Lexend apparently is really complementary to early learning and very distinctive. It's not, for us, it doesn't look that much more special or adjusted, but we've seen fonts with serifs and sans serifs, those type things. It is something apparently scientifically is really good for dyslexia. I'm sure you probably knew that, but it was something I just learned the other day and felt like I'd jump in and share.
Yeah, no, thank you. I say any resources is great. I haven't particularly used that font yet. I know for a fact that they're saying that for students that struggle with dyslexia, actually doing handwriting before the printing is better because, and I noticed this too, my students and my co-teacher and I joke all the time, we want to do an action research on this. All of our students start letters from the bottom when they're doing manuscript, and we're like, how were you doing that? Like, that's just not how I naturally formed my A or my O. I always started that dotted line, right? But they're saying that if you start teaching the script, it comes natural because a lot of children start the letters from the bottom. So I found that was a fun fact as well. So if my third grade students are starting to switch between the print and the script, I let them go ahead, because whatever barriers we can remove, I say let's remove it. So script is a good thing.
Yeah, excellent. And Matt, I was just looking, right here in Google Docs, that Lexend is an option. So it's right there for teachers to use, and they actually have a large variety of extra light, normal, etc. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you both for sharing that. So transitioning into upper elementary, even into middle school years with literacy, what is that focus like as you transition into those older grades? So you obviously will still have students that need support with phonics skills and those components, but what is that primary focus for teachers lean towards in those older years where they've crossed that fluency bridge as you were describing?
Yeah, no, that's a great one, because I think I just want to backtrack on that for 1 second. I think because of what we've discovered about scientific and evidence-based practices for reading, we know that there is really no stopping point for learning our language. And I recently took a course this summer in something called morphology, which is the study of words. It's our Greek and Latin roots, our Anglo-Saxon based base words and prefixes and all of these wonderful things. And I looked at some of the pages and I went, oh my goodness, like I was asleep during class, obviously. And, I'm a specialist, right? So I should know all of these things. And, learning our language is kind of like this never ending adventure, I like to say. So it's not like once we get to fifth grade, the phonics button turns off, or studying, the language and building words turns off, and we just switch over to comprehension. Um, I would say around third, fourth, fifth grade is where, hopefully, if students have received really good, structured, systematic, and explicit instruction in phonics and the basics, the consonants, the vowels, when they were younger, we can switch over into that morphology study. So you can teach them that, re and write, re is a prefix, and we'd have the base word right. And what does that word mean? And that helps them with their writing skills. So that's always going to continue. But then it's that switch over, like you mentioned, from learning to read to reading to learn. So we want to get the basic foundation there. So when they're picking up those chapter books, we can start talking about the comprehension questions, and we can teach the skills and strategies for making inferences and understanding why authors write stories. So author's purpose and making connections to text, and that's pretty much what it is. When we read, we're reading to understand, and we're reading to make a connection. So while we're hopefully still encouraging our students to study our words and our language, because that especially helps with writing, we want to start talking about those more deeper comprehension questions as they're going through and enjoying a text.
All right, I'm going to jump in with my question, and please belittle me if this is something I should know. I have no problem with that. So to give you some context, I taught learning support for fifth and sixth grade, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. And what I felt like was my responsibility was often with the learners in my classroom to develop as close to fluency as possible. And obviously, every year the text gets a little bit harder and the gap gets a little bit wider. And one of the things morally that I was struggling with was I was continuing to practice fluency skills with fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, which is an important thing to continue working on. I'm not saying ignore it, but I was starting to struggle with the point of diminishing returns. They had received so much instruction in phonemic awareness and up to vocabulary, segmenting words and diagramming them in all of those facets, that what they needed was to have access to grade level material in a way that made sense to them. And so I guess one of the things that I always struggle is do you feel like there's that transition? And the reason I jump now is because you mentioned the learning to read transitioning to learning content through reading. Is there a point where you feel like phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary gets diminished or wears away? Because in some ways, they've probably received direct instruction on how to read from 4, 5, 6 different teachers in a regular ed environment, let alone a special ed environment. So I know you deal mostly with the littles, but at what point do you transition and say, I need to support them to be successful, knowing that this is going to be a hurdle? So is that they're excelling auditorily, that they can still gather grade level material and slowly work on that fluency still? What is your balance or your judgment in that way?
Yeah, sure. I love this question. 3 things come to mind, and I hope I don't forget them. So if we only get to 2, then
Not a problem.
We'll just give the audience a laugh here. But this is, I think, the point where a lot of people are trying to explain a little bit better what the foundation and the heart of the term science of reading is. We have 2 different components that make up reading. Like we said, it's the decoding, like the phonics, the phonemic awareness, and the language component. And some people who are fans of either balanced literacy or whole language say, well, kids don't get to read authentic literature and they don't get to enjoy books and that. The whole point is we know that when we are thinking about reading from day one in kindergarten, we want to be reading that read aloud book with big words to them that they don't know when they look at it themselves, how to say it, how to write it, what it means. And we create a print rich environment like we say from balanced literacy and whole language, and we expose them to those big words, and we encourage them to use them. One great little plug here, my co-teacher has created a classroom theme for us. I would love to talk about this maybe in another episode with him, but he created a character called Fernie the Dragon. And Fernie the Dragon teaches my first graders big words like enormous. Do I expect them to spell it? No, but we go on like a hunt. Do you hear it? Can you see it somewhere? We teach them to recognize it. So to answer my first answer to your question, the first part is hopefully we start that exposure with the language and those, above and beyond grade level texts before, even while we're teaching the foundations. The second thing is, and I think we always struggle with this, be it gen ed or special ed, is to find those high interest, low readability texts. It's kind of like, finding the golden ticket in teaching, because we want our kids to access grade level material, but in terms that they can read independently. So that's pretty much it for those. And I'm always on the lookout for those. And that's why we start with decodable text and build our way up. Some people have deep feelings about decodable text. I'm a big fan because that's our foundation. If we can get kids to read, then eventually we can transition over to that particular, sort of more in-depth literature there. But I think that for your older kids, they've been exposed, and if they still need it, my third point being, unfortunately, there's no direct answer. As a teacher, it's all based on what the kids need, right? So if they still need that practice and the fluency, we should try to dedicate time to that. But also, like you mentioned, dedicate time to maybe reading the book out loud together and exposing them to their grade level text. So auditorily, and especially our students with dyslexia, they tend to very much remember things auditorily. Give them that exposure to the content rich text at that grade level. And that goes, a second part of my third point is we're not teaching enough content. My great guru that I read and study about all the time, Natalie Wexler, tells us we're not teaching the content young enough. So when they get to those harder texts, even if the words are a little challenging, if they have that background knowledge is big. It'll help you get through it. So there's a lot of moving parts to it, but I hope that if there's a listener out there right now, like sort of smiling and going, that sort of debunks my fear of the science of reading. We want to really remember that it's about both sides of that equation.
Fantastic answer. Also, kudos for remembering all three parts.
Thank you. I'm very proud of myself for that.
You're doing very well in your job interview right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and Ken, I don't know if you feel like this, but I feel like people, Leanne, in your position are the ones that truly understand what kids need, yet you often don't get enough time or a platform to share with fellow teachers the information that you've researched so diligently about the most important part, especially in early literacy. In my school, I feel like people in the specialty of whether that's reading specialists or what have you get burdened with the tier 3 learners before they would be identified for learning support, what have you, and just absolutely talk circles around me. And I'm saying, oh goodness, I have to teach ELA instruction to 24 kids and hopefully keep most of them away from you, yet you guys are truly experts in that field. And it just goes to say that there's so much substance behind fluency, and something that feels like reading is really tough in that realm of you're obviously adding vocabulary words and understanding meaning, but from that higher end, once it really snaps into understanding, it's really difficult to explain how you were able to do it, kind of like riding a bike for that first time. When you can't do it, you just can't do it. The moment it clicks, you just kind of get it. So to explain it so eloquently is just a true gift.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I at least see in my district developing more and more in our reading and in our RELA blocks with our elementary and our middle school students. And it's the phonics is becoming part of those upper grade level experiences. and some programs that we're using to really support it. It was something that was coming in as I was exiting teaching general education 5th grade, and I do think it's so important. I do think it's important for teachers to understand the science because it's different than when we went to college, right? And the what we understand about how students learn to read is different than what we would have experienced when we started teaching, when we were training to be teachers. I want to lean
Sure.
into I want to lean
Could
into
I
what
just
go please
interject on that there?
please.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's kind of like swinging to the other side of who I am as a teacher leader with the pre-service teachers, like I mentioned. That's kind of like the whole point. And if you're deep into literacy like me, that's one of the biggest conversations that different places like Windward Institute, AIM Institute, Amplify, and so many places, even my own training house, as I call them, IMSE, everybody's talking about the same thing. Is this is a problem because we're not teaching the teachers. Teach me, teacher. Like the kids are saying, teach me, teacher. But my pre-service teachers, I do a presentation for my pre-service teachers for the honor society that I lead over at Kane every year. In fact, my officers are like, "So you're doing it in September, so we can actually do a follow up this year," because it just generated such buzz. They afterward they're all sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, why am I not taught this in my class? I have like one class, how to teach reading, and it's all about just comprehension or writing pieces on, answering questions in text." And that's also one of the things that I'm very passionate about, and I hope someday, with a little luck, I would love to attend the program for my doctorate at Mount St. Joseph's University in Cincinnati, Ohio, because one of the things that doctorate program would train me to do is to be a professor of literacy and teach these good evidence-based practices to our pre-service teachers. So then years 2, 3, and 4, because year 1, it's survival, right? So you get through it, great. No teaching goes on. You learn classroom management. That comes first. 2, 3, 4, you go, they're scratching their head going, "So how do I teach reading again?" And we need to really prepare our college students. So I guess that's my little PSA service announcement about bringing it down to, even our teacher preparation programs. And all the teachers that are currently teaching are getting trained great, but we have to start this early. Just like we want our pre-K, K, and 1 students to learn the letters and the sounds, so come 4th grade, there's not a problem. Our pre-service teachers need to learn this, so when you're like me, it's not a problem. It's, very simple.
I totally agree, and you see it. There's many different programs that implement these strategies in different ways. And what I see as an instructional coach is the teachers are trying to learn how to utilize the program to its best ability while also trying to digest and understand the science of reading. And if they can come to the profession with that background knowledge, like you're speaking about, then it's more about them applying their knowledge of the science of reading and all of these different skills to the program or the curriculum that their district has in place to utilize these skills in the classroom. And so now it's more about learning how the district wants to attack these skills versus learning the skills and figuring out also how to implement it in the classroom. So I couldn't agree more. And I think there's probably a lot of different teaching things that we could put in that category that does not get talked about in pre-service
Definitely.
education.
And we all need to give ourselves grace
Mm-hmm.
because like districts are dealing with a lot, and it's a big heavy load to carry. So, as a teacher, I my biggest piece of advice is give yourself the grace. You've earned it, you've deserved it. And teaching is lifelong learning, right? So we wouldn't tell our students, "Well, you learned the letter A, you're done." So we got to continue to learn too, and just look at it as a learning experience.
Absolutely. I want to lean into, you've mentioned a couple times about your co-teacher, and co-teaching is something that not all teachers experience. It's something that sometimes we have the opportunity to do, and there is a really, really great way to co-teach, and there are ways that are not co-teaching at all. Having 2 adults in the room that are certified to be teachers is not co-teaching. So, can you share just what your experience has been like with co-teaching and how you and your co-teacher have developed the systems in your class to really capitalize on that opportunity?
Sure. And I hope this leans into a whole episode on co-teaching because well, again, we could be here for 2 days talking about this. So I don't want to like go into it too much without him because he really has been my partner in crime. We've done presentations on co-teaching before for pre-service teachers, for practicing educators. And my experience with co-teaching, I've had it both ways. I've had other co-teachers, and it was more, like you said, that parallel instruction. But when you really take the time to establish and build a foundational relationship with your co-teacher, I think that that's what is the first step in making all the difference. We admit we get lucky, and there might be someone out there listening that's going to roll their eyes at this one, and that's okay because we've seen that before. But he and I, when we were in second grade and last year in first grade teaching together, we were together all day. So it's like you better hope you like one another, right? And we developed that relationship. But co-teaching, as we're learning this year, because we're not together, he's going to be the special education intervention teacher coming in and out. We're actually revamping our presentation and our talks and hopefully even our future articles we're writing called Co-Teaching Redefined, because we understood co-teaching from being together all the time, and we know that most of the time for most educators that's not the case. We know that co-teaching means you have your ESL teachers coming in or your special education interventionists or those tier 3 instructors coming in, but you can still establish those same relationships. Some of the key points that we have gone on are communication is definitely key. We're always in communication, and not just about teaching, like I know about his dog Lucky and he knows about my family. So we've established that rapport. We're always reflecting together, and we're looking at our students' scores and the data and how we can refine our practices based on that. But I think that and there's differences, right? He's a musician and he's very talented with tech, and I'm the literacy person. He is too, but I think he would agree I'm a little bit more I geek out on it a little bit more because he says to me, you're the only teacher I know that could be in the middle of a math lesson and mention something on reading. So I'm the literacy person for sure. But I think the key component that has really made our relationship is that engagement factor, because one of the things that we love to do is engage our students. And like I mentioned before, he's created this character that's helped our students learn those larger vocabulary words. And without revealing too much because it's still in the works, but I'm helping him develop that into his own brand. Because I looked at that idea and I said, "You've got an idea." And he actually was my co-teacher was named Disney's top 100 innovative educators this past year because of this idea. And he went out to Anaheim, California, and I was saying, "Yay, go Paul, go, this is great." So I think that we found our link through that brand, and I took down all the decorations in my classroom. It's now themed in that brand, and I've really embraced what he enjoyed bringing into the classroom to engage the students. So if you're new to co-teaching or you're looking to refresh or even redefine it yourself, find that it factor that not only engages the students but gets you excited. We got excited about Fernie the Dragon. So find something that engages both of you and the kids, and that's a very deep key to making co-teaching really not just work but make it last as well. Because like I said, he's not with me, but we still call each other co-teachers, and we're going to continue our work together.
Matt, have you been on either side of the co-teaching relationship?
See, I haven't. My wife is used to teach the year above, and when she came out of college, she was thrust into a co-teaching role, and in that role, she found herself. Now, this is naive young teacher advocating for her student. So she would co-teach, but she would also push against the expectations of the regular ed teacher, and there can easily be friction, and she loved her coworkers, but sometimes they didn't always work together great. I think if she were to go back 10 years later and bring some of the general teaching knowledge, it would be a totally different conversation. I have only ever consulted with my teacher, is probably the best way to put it, as the learning support teacher or in the regular environment coming to the special ed or reading specialists in that realm where I was using their ideas, having them represent maybe a demo lesson if they're an expert in a certain field. So I have very limited experience. What about you, Ken?
I had the opportunity one time, and it was when I taught fifth grade math to the entire grade level, in addition to reading to my homeroom. And we typically rotated just by homeroom amongst the three fifth grade classes, but that year we had sorted the students by their ability in math, because while they were rotating math, it was science and social studies, and then everybody had ELA at the same time. And so we sorted them by math, and the class that had the most struggling learners and a lot of the inclusive students, I had a special ed teacher with me every day. And this was at a point where I was utilizing small group almost on a daily basis. And I already had a very good working relationship with this teacher because her students have been included in my classroom every year. And most of what we did was just run two small groups. And it just worked well because I was already planning small groups for the other classes that I was teaching without her. And it really just became an opportunity for us to provide instruction to more students at the same time. And so that was kind of the system we had worked out. I think there was a lot of different opportunities for growth, but we only had the opportunity to do it 1 year. What are ways that you, as you grew with your co-teacher, that you reflected together to see where you could grow, where you could improve, and where you felt you were working together really strongly?
Do you mean what were the areas that we felt we could get better at, or how
Yeah,
did we go about that?
both.
Um, okay, so I think how we went about that, because time, just when you're in school, time goes at double the amount of rate, right? So 5 minutes is like 5 seconds. I think a lot of it came through just our anecdotal note sharing. We shared everything from Google Docs to notepads and things like that. And also just our general conversations walking down the hallway together and after school and things like that. So we did a lot of, again, communicating and conversation and sharing. Our areas that we always felt that we can improve, and it's funny you mentioned your two small groups. um, that there's the 6 models of co-teaching that's out there. It's a very simple Google search if you've never heard of it, friends, so I suggest you do it. We kind of used that as like our backbone at first, and said, okay, we want to try, like you said, the parallel teaching, 2 small groups, we're teaching the lesson at the same time. But I think it's hard as co-teachers, especially if you're together all day. And we talked about this even just a couple of days ago as we were working on a presentation, that you kind of, because time goes by so fast and you're so busy, you kind of get stuck in these habits, if you will, where you're doing the same co-teaching model every day, like one teach, one assist. I think that was our fallback one a lot. Like, I'm the gen ed teacher, I know the lesson, I'm up in the room. He was walking around, meeting in small groups, trying to give the modifications and modify the work a little bit. So I think for us, we always wanted to, we still want to continue to challenge ourselves to use the other different models. And my co-teacher said it best. He goes, I would love to have one day where it was just one teach, one observe. And he would reflect on both the students and my teaching to help me and also to help him. We never got to do that model because in actuality it's just so difficult because of all the challenges that comes in the classroom. So I think trying out those different models and methods is always an area of growth for us.
Absolutely. And I just found a quick, like you said, it's a quick Google search. I found an article that explains them all real easily. So I'm gonna link that up in our show notes, which you can find by just scrolling down wherever you're watching or listening to this. I would love to pivot pretty hard here and just learn about you outside of co-teaching and outside of literacy. You teach first grade, you teach second grade. There's so much more that goes into the day other than that. So what's your classroom like? What do students experience outside of that literacy block? How do you make it a special place for them to be?
Yeah, like I said, not to make it pivot back, but the last couple years since my co-teacher has created this brand, if you will, I took down my, not all of them, I still have my little palm tree in there, my palm tree and polka dot theme, and I have embraced our theme for the learning cave. So we both agreed that we wanted it to be something special. So now that I'm back by myself and I'll be alone, I want them to feel always that this is their learning cave and this is a place to make mistakes. Because as a very famous literacy leader, Dr. Terry Noland, one of my favorite people on the planet, says, you have to fail forward. And saying that failure is not an option, or like it's getting kids afraid to make mistakes, I think that kids are starting to be afraid of mistakes because of what they're exposed to and see. In my class, I love when we make mistakes. I point out so often, I'm like, see, boys and girls, Miss M just made a mistake, because I want them to see that that's okay. As long as we're failing forward, we're taking something from that, we're learning from it, and also we're leaving that footprint behind us that we can also help and turnkey that to somebody else. um, I've been known for my classroom management, my differentiated instruction, and one of the things I really like to challenge myself to do, and I know I have to continue to grow in this area, is to do more cross curricular lessons. Like my co teacher said, I'm the only one that he knows. I could be in the middle of a math lesson and have a thought on reading, but that's how I integrate it. When we do our math problems, I'm saying, okay, what's happening in the beginning of this story? What's happening in the middle? What's happening at the end? I try to intermingle all these things. If it's about something in science, I'm like, remember in science we were talking about plants? Well, so and so in the problem for math is planting flowers. So I'm trying to always, even if it's just a small moment, have those cross curricular connections happening, because to me it's about the background, the content knowledge, and building that. And I want my students to feel comfortable, even if it's a subject that they're not. I know what it's like to not feel comfortable in math. So if my teacher could make that word problem into a personal connection for me, or connect it to something fun that I liked in science, I was all in. So I'm trying to use what I know and enjoy for myself in the classroom, because I love reading, don't like math so much, but I try to make those connections. And um, outside of that, I'm always trying to bring in what I'm learning from my conferences I attend. I'm an avid reader. I'm trying to bring in all of that knowledge to make myself better and show my students that we are here to learn for the long haul, and learning is growing, and I want them to love learning as much as I do. So they tell me they love to learn, so I hope that that's true. But I'm always trying to leave that legacy in that way, that I want them to love learning and hopefully share that with others.
That is a beautiful answer by all means. And I'm sure that your kids in school do love learning just with how much passion you put into it. I was just kind of thinking about the whole conversation and going back to an early conversation or point that you made in the conversation about not having enough content in things like reading. And then you circle back and talk about co-teaching, how that is a collaborative activity where even if you're doing math instruction, you can pull these features in. And it just had me wondering, again, I'm just taking the opportunity to talk to an expert here, compared to where I'm coming from, to look at education in general and say, what are certain things maybe, you mentioned the pillars of reading, but what would you say are pillars and priorities of maybe different realms of education? Because I think we hear a lot of the concepts we talk about and that you've mentioned, things like co-teaching and maybe integrating other subjects through reading, and maybe that being a great way to supplement learning. But sometimes there are outside factors or inside factors that make that challenging. So, what are some of the priorities you might say that someone could leave and go in tomorrow and say, I'm going to increase my strength in supporting reading skills, regardless of the subject area that we're focusing on?
This is a great challenging question. So I just want to make sure I do get the question clear. So, you're asking? What are the things as far as content to build into literacy?
Well,
I
just kind of like maybe a suggestion of of what synthesizing a lot of what you're saying. How can we narrow down and say, here are some things that I would really suggest? And it could be subject specific. It doesn't have to be. But if you are taking steps in these direction, regardless of scenario, your kids are going to benefit when it comes to developing reading.
Yeah, I think that giving students opportunities, like we said, that background knowledge, the content, and expose them to just different experiences. We know that depending on where you're teaching, not all students have the same types of experiences. So bringing in that real world content, be it through videos or, there's even podcasts for kids, and having them see and hear and use what I would say even some multisensory. People think multisensory means sand trays and shaving cream. That's not true. It's multimodal ways to learn. Give students the opportunity to hear it, to be able to say it, to be able to see it, to be able to move around and interact with it. When we get them up and moving and we're doing all of these different things, it sticks, and I'm the same way. I tell my students, you do not have to sit all day. I don't sit all day, so I don't expect you to sit all day. So the more that we are actively engaged in our learning, no matter what it is, I think that those connections, and therefore the connections in our brain, can definitely, be further strengthened in that way. And when you're bringing all of the different types of multisensory instruction in, that also gives you, to me, it gives me those spark moments for how I can connect like literacy into everything. For example, in the sciences, when you're reading a passage and there's that long scientific word, you can say, oh my goodness, we just learned this Greek or Latin root the other day, right? So there's all those small, subtle ways. And I think that for educators, we have these big, great ideas, right? And we're so ambitious. Anyone who says we're not is just totally wrong. But I think that we have to go back to another guru that I love to listen to, Ron Clark. He says, what is that 1%, that one small thing that we can bring in that can make a difference? You don't have to do 20%. You don't have to do 10% even, but what's that 1% thing? And I know for me, that's what one of my goals. I try to make like 3 goals for myself every year. I want to find just that 1%, that one small thing that I can change or integrate that I hope can make a difference in my classroom. So I think having a small goal like that is a great place to start.
I love that. So I want to transition our conversation into the exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1: what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
I love that question. I think that anytime a teacher brings him or herself into the classroom and the students see their teacher getting excited about what they're learning, I think that that gets them excited, even if it's not the most exciting topic or subject, when we bring that energy. So I think it's all about our energy and maybe a little bit of a performance. But when you bring yourself and your own personal connections to it and your own energy to it, I think that that makes all the difference in the world for when your students learn it.
Fantastic. What is the best piece of advice that you've received? And it could have come from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
Oh my goodness. I have been so blessed to have been given such great advice, but I think that for me, it's been, again, to a combination of different things. And I'm going to go back to pulling from one of my favorite literacy gurus. Dr. Terry Nolan is always, she's like a coach to me, right? She's always reminding me that I myself should never be afraid to fail forward and make mistakes and constantly learn. And she mentioned in one of her podcasts about leaving a footprint and a legacy behind. And that really struck me because I always want to make sure that no matter what I'm doing for my students, my colleagues, my pre-service teachers, that when I look behind me, I see my legacy behind me and I know I made a difference. Likewise, with that, from a great book that I've read called Indelible Leadership, I've come into this role, especially as County Teacher of the Year last year, finding myself, people looking up to us, right? The cohort, like, wow, you're the county teachers, right? You're the best in the state of New Jersey. And some of us are like, oh my goodness, we have that, imposter syndrome. I've learned to embrace that I am a leader and I'm still growing as a leader, but a leader is not defined by their own success and how many trophies or things that they've earned, but by the success of the people that they've, coached and mentored themselves. And I said, well, then I must be a pretty good leader because, the officers I work with on my honor society, they do an awesome job, and I'm like, they don't even need me anymore. So as a leader, you want to make yourself dispensable. That's how you know you've hit the nail right on the head, because that your people that you've worked with don't need you anymore. And I see that starting to happen. And I think that all of that together has been such a great piece of advice, because I'm always looking at what I've done, where I'm at right now, and where I'm going.
That is an answer that makes Ken smile. He loves systems and the idea of minimizing his role when kids are in the room. Um, I'll say we are recording this at the very beginning of the school year, so that may adjust your answer, it may not, but we know that the school year goes in waves. There are days that things are going well. There are also days, possibly weeks, where we are struggling to survive. What is something you feel like every educator should hear to help power up through those moments of struggle?
Yes. You are not alone, and we are all in this together, right? Because if we don't have each other, in essence, who do we have? Because, like we say, we speak our own language. So a lot of people who are not in this profession, even our loved ones, our friends, our family, they say, yeah, no, I get it, I hear what you're saying, but we kind of know secretly deep down they were not with us when we had that kid today moment, right? Or we had that faculty meeting, they weren't there. So they don't know what we go through. So find your people, form your pod. You're not alone. And it's hard because I am not forgiving of myself, but I think, like our students, we teach them to forgive themselves and learn from their mistakes. We have got to try our best to do that. And maybe that's your 1% this year. It's just to learn a little bit of extra forgiveness for yourself. So maybe that was 3 things, but I tried to mesh it into one.
We'll accept it,
That's
that's for
perfect.
sure.
It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
Yeah, I think it's just one factor of courage, and that can often take a lot. But a famous quote, forgot who said it, but courage is not the absence of fear, but the judgment that something's more important than fear. And taking risks might mean that you're not always well received or liked. But like I said before, find your people that support you and are with you on that crazy train. I have my friends on my crazy train. They are stuck with me on that train, and they know it, because they're going to be the ones that are always going to continue to encourage you to have that courage. So if you're kind of like stuck in that rut, that mundane thing, do something daring, take something you've learned from a webinar or a conference, try it, even if it's not well received by your neighbor next door, or it's a little different from the pacing guide. And because if one student gets one takeaway from it, it is time well spent.
Fantastic. I have enjoyed this conversation, even though it is definitely outside of my comfort zone of what I'm focused on. I feel like I uh, have learned so much from your research and obviously your care and love of the development of reading. How can our audience continue to connect with you and learn with you going forward? Either website or Twitter, etc.
Yeah, sure. I think the easiest and fastest way, everybody loves social media. So, and I know my spelling of my name will be provided, but it's at Ms. Malinowsky, and it's MS and then my last name on everything: Twitter, Facebook. I have a page there that I dedicate just to teaching. On my Instagram page, I am a very beginning blogger. I don't have the fancy graphics and things like that. It's really just more like a brain dump every week. But again, if it helps one person, it served its purpose. So if you're interested in blogs, I have what I call a new beginner blog on there. On my Instagram, it's right on my page. So please, follow me, like me, reach out on social media with questions, and from there I can give out my email or other ways to contact me, but I think those are the fastest ways.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll link up to all of those in our show notes page, which can be found on our website at powereduup.com, or just scrolling down wherever you're watching or listening. Leana, thank you so much. I really had a blast. I really think this is going to turn out to be very informative and very helpful for teachers to really diagnose and think about their literacy instruction and their instruction overall. So thank you for your time. Thank you for what you do for your students. And thank you for what you're doing with our pre-service teachers, which will have a huge impact on countless students that you won't even be able to keep track of. So thank you again for listening to our listeners. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
All right, as we power down this episode, Leana, you have left us quite powered up. Thank you for your time. And to our listeners, stay well, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.